we'll go straight to the third paper. The third paper is by Anil Kumar. His paper is titled Rising India Through China's Eyes. And Anil is a doctoral candidate in the Department of East Asian Studies at the University of Delhi. And the two discussants we have for his paper are Professor Wang Bangwei, professor at the Institute of Oriental Studies at Peking University, and Professor Anand Young, professor of International Studies and History at the University of Washington. Professor Wang, may I invite you to make your comments, please? Or would Anand, would you like to go first?
How are you, Anil? This is coming from a transplanted Delhiite who is now based in Seattle, Washington. Good evening. Rising India Through China's Eyes does precisely what its title announces. As PhD candidate Anil Kumar of the Department of East Asian Studies of Delhi University states, his paper assesses China's views, and I quote, of the story of a rising India in terms of its origins, drivers, threat perceptions, and China's response to dealing with its one-time peer competitor. To answer his question about how China perceives rising India, and I find this locution sort of interesting that he insists on using the term rising India instead of India rising, and of course those two words mean something quite different, but more about this later. He divides up his analysis into 5 parts. First, origins of the rising India story. 2, changes in China's perceptions in that it no longer writes of India as a strategic adversary, a point that will be made in the increasing coverage given to India. And he cites an article that I think many of you are familiar with, a 2008 article written by the Chinese scholar Liu Qian in Contemporary International Relations. And this article entitled China's India Studies says that since the mid-1990s, more than 200 books and 2,000 research papers and monographs have been written about India by China's IR scholars, also 40 theses or dissertations. He doesn't take into account, of course, the drive since the 1990s for Chinese scholars in general to publish a lot more, because, of course, universities are now judged on the basis of their output. A 3rd section examines the drivers of the changing perceptions. In the 4th section, he shifts from perspectives to an attempt to take a measure of their comparable military, diplomatic, and economic strengths. The 5th and final section attempts to see how China has responded to India from seeing it as a peer competitor to downgrading that estimation to once again considering it as, quote, a more strategic threat to its regional strategy. The paper considers the 1990s as a watershed period, and I think we all know why 1990s is critical not only in economic terms, but also in the rise of India's military power. His basic point is that India, quote, took an array of path-breaking initiatives in quick succession in the late 1990s and beyond to herald its arrival as a great power in the unfolding 21st century, thus removing the Chinese, and he puts it in bracket, misperception. I think there's no question, and I think everyone in the room would agree with this argument, that in the 21st century, unlike the 1990s and before, China began to consider India more seriously because of, quote, rising military power, its multi-aligned diplomacy, giving growing economic clout and rising soft power. He does not, however, talk about the value he assigns to each of these developments and really just jumbles them all together. He doesn't differentiate about the importance of one factor over another. Is it economic clout? Is it military power? Is it soft power? But treats them all and somewhat uncritically. One of his arguments is that India is successful because of its soft power, because it appears attractive to the rest of the world because of its democracy, its cultural values, its large pool of English speakers. And he contrasts this, and I think this contrast is much too sharp, with China, which is mostly perceived as a hard power oriented country as opposed to India. He makes much of India's soft power, even emphasizing that its great power status is based on its 5,000-year-old civilization, just like India, just like China, so it too can claim tremendous soft power. Much of the analysis of his paper is India-centric, even though its aim is to illuminate Chinese perspectives on a rising India. Furthermore, it tells us a lot more about rising India, actually India rising, than it does about China rising and China continuing to rise. As a result, the analysis is cast India in the lead role and China in more of a supporting, even a cameo role. More acted upon than acting, except when he briefly breaks from his otherwise mostly even-handed script and actually characterizes China as playing, quote, a villainous role to keep India out of important global and regional institutions, despite its acknowledgement of India as a great power. The rest of the analysis does not lapse into that kind of language, but there is that moment towards the end of the paper when he does that. Mr. Kumar does not take into account, other than the few pieces written in English by Chinese scholars, does not take into account, and I think this would make his presentation a lot stronger, that you can see the coverage about India across China in any number of ways, not just a few articles written by policymakers, but also written by IR scholars, but also in pronouncements that policymakers have made, the number of stories that appear routinely now in Chinese newspapers about India, the much greater coverage of India in Chinese blogs. So there are any number of ways that one can get a sense of how much more India looms in the Chinese imagination than was once the case. In his analysis, and this is sort of the final point, because he mostly sees this relationship in terms of a hyphen that's links, that joins India and China, he neglects, I think, if one is looking at their relationship in political and strategic terms, he neglects the fact that there should also be a bracket that follows the end of the hyphen, which is India, that China and India's relationship is also shaped by the presence of other powers, particularly the United States and US allies in Asia, that one cannot think of this purely in bilateral terms, and I think we've seen this crop up over and over again in our conversations, that when you're talking about international relations and you're talking about power and security matters, it's not China and India, it's China and India and the United States and a host of strategic US allies in Asia that really shape this relationship. So thank you, Anil, for an excellent paper, and I hope you will survey many of the other things written about India in China, unfortunately, and this is a point that's been made several times before, much of this literature is largely in Chinese. And so if you were actually able to look at some of the theses and dissertations and papers written in Chinese, perhaps it would just shore up your paper a lot more. So thank you for letting me read your paper.
Thomas.
Thank you, Anand. May I invite Professor Wang Bangwei?
Good morning or good afternoon, I'm not sure. Good evening. Good evening. Mr. Kumar. Yeah, yes, I'm delighted to be invited to give some comment to the paper presented by Mr. Kumar. Actually, I have to frankly speaking, I'm not, this is out of my fields. I would like, but I would like to provide some amateur view, you see. And just my impression, you see, the topic Mr. Kumar discussed is some, as I understand it, some kind of the issue of the international, the relationship of the political or military relationship between China and India. And actually, you see, for my own study, I study the cultural relation, the history of the cultural relation between two countries 1,000 years ago. But what I saw is most all of that are those things friendly. But now I found in this paper, now so it's not unfriendly, but it's not so friendly. My impression, some confrontation or some maybe some good word as a competition, and you see Mr. Anand Yang has given a very perfectly give a description of the contents of this paper. I need not to talk more about the paper, but you see what I understand, and as a whole, the paper provides somehow logical analysis. It provides some facts, but the starting point is, as I understand, India and China, we have some rivals, we have some competition, but we never been some kind of enemy. Even in the history of the two countries, we have once in 1960s with some conflict. It's a very limited scale, and we, just as yesterday I talked with some friends of the ICI, you see, over the 2,000 years contact of the two countries, only one conflict is never happened in the world. You just see in Europe, between Britain and France and Germany, they have so many, quite a number of the war and the conflicts in their history. But in China and India, just one. Of course, it's some kind of tragedy, but even today, we think both countries are friends. And what you see, and the other question I would like to ask is, you talk about the Chinese perception of India, or the rising India, or they say through China eyes. But the China is, but in my eyes, I always say, yeah, Indian is our friend, is the friend of China, is a neighbor of China, and is a friend of China. Of course, we have some. For example, you talk. And in China, I think you maybe I think when you talk you mentioned China's perception. You mean the Chinese government. Chinese government, even among the Chinese government, or of course in China we have some. I heard some people criticize. Oh, sorry. And my impression is that in both sides, lack of the knowledge of each other. For example, in China, if we mention what is the three biggest cities in United States or in China, the people, much more people know these three biggest cities in United States. They do not know the three biggest cities in India. We are lack of in China. In China, I think even the Chinese people, they have some, they're short of the knowledge of the India today. And in India, the people, I think, is almost the same. We would like to see more people to come to China, or more people to go to India to let us to understand or to know each other much more. And I do not, actually, frankly speaking, I do not agree some, for example, you mentioned the policy of some, for example, the page, which, let me see, is a big paper, so. You said, you mentioned that China had developed a four-pronged strategy to manage the rise of the India. Importantly, all of these four components of this strategy are in place simultaneously. These components are the first, a carrot and a stick policy to sabotage growing Indo-US ties. It's too much, frankly speaking. It's too much. And to intensify military encirclement of India, I do not see, I have not seen such kind of things. India is so big, China is impossible to build encirclement or military encirclement of India. And the third, you mentioned, to deepen the entente Korea with Pakistan. Pakistan, in my eyes, China and Indian are brothers. And Indian and Pakistan brothers too. And ethically, I think India and Pakistan, what is the conflict between us is something left by, it's a tragedy. But you see, basically they are friends. They're not only friends, they are brothers. And the force to keep India out of the region and the global institution. It's impossible for Chinese government to do things to keep India or take India out of the region and the global institution. India is so big, no one can stop the development of India. No one can. U.S. cannot do it. China cannot do it. Russia or the other country cannot do it. I think it's, in my eyes, it's too much. And some you see, for example, he mentioned you see the character, China has emerged as China's single largest trading partner during Wen Jiabao's visit to India in December 2010. He proposed to raise bilateral trade to US $100 billion by 2015. 15. And it's a good thing. Is it a good thing to do more trade between India and China, or just we want to stop it or to minimize the volume of this trade? It's a good thing. And for example, they show that China relentless in the pursuit to forestall the Indians slide into the U.S. orbit. Sorry, you say, Mr. Kumar, you strongly believe that this pattern will continue in the foreseeable future as well. It's some kind of, I'm sorry, it's imagination. And you mentioned, you see, China completed the Kurian-Lhasa railway in 2006, or to build the railway or the highway in Tibet. Does China has no right to build a railway or the highway in its own land? And Tibet also needs to develop its economy as well. The people in Tibet also have their own right to develop their economy. But it's not, of course, there are some, you can understand such kind of the project, but it's basically is some economical development in China. It's not totally action against India. The time, I think my time is finished, so the concluding, I think, for example, the last few words, and the last paragraph of your paper, you said, this is a strategy to make sure. Let me see what I said. You mentioned a Chinese policy to make sure that China constitutes to remain the sole tiger on the mountain of the Asian continent. The forest of Asia is so big that it can contain not only two tigers, even more, and other animals. It's a big forest. Sorry, my speech is frank. I would like to express my feeling. I say I am not an expert on the international relations. My feeling, I always do try my best to promote the friendship or understanding of our two countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I think on that very interesting note, may I now invite Anil to quickly respond. Please take 4 to 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your comments. I would start by responding to the last point by Professor Bangwei, when he says that Asia is vast enough where more than one tigers can coexist. So my question would be, why don't Asia support more countries from? Why does not China support more countries from Asia? For example, Japan, India into the UNSC with veto power. And regarding his other points, that my paper is too anti-China or something like that. Okay, I do mention that I do agree that I might have cited some facts which I should have put moderately, but I think the material that I have explored, it does vindicate my whole point. Again, given the time limitation, I won't be touching all his comments. And moving to the Dr. Anand, sorry, regarding the drivers that made China to reorient its strategic posture towards India, I mentioned 4 drivers, namely India's military rise, India's economic rise, India's great power diplomacy, and India's soft power. My argument is that the combined effect of all these factors have made China to reorient its India posture. I didn't try to prioritize any of the drivers, but to my mind, the interplay of all the four factors together has what made China reorient its India stance. And on this hyphenation, okay, India-China hyphenation. My argument is that before 2000s, India was always hyphenated with Pakistan. But given the steady rise of India's national power consisting of the soft power and hard power, now again India has begun to be bracketed, in fact re-hyphenated with China, something which was the case in when they were newly founded as new republics in 1947 in the case of India and 1949 in the case of China. And more, yes, I do agree that given my inability to read the Chinese language, I do agree that I should maybe I'm not vast of I couldn't explore all the relevant material to write about this topic. So I do agree that the language limitation does play its role in my case. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anil. I think we're really running out of time. We just have about 5 minutes for a quick round of Q&A. So here is what I would suggest. If we have very brief comments or queries, we may not really be able to give Anil a chance to respond because it'll not be fair. We also have a fourth presentation. Chris's presentation is still, Ashok has allowed us to extend the session till 12:30 since we began late. So if there are any single line queries or questions,
Anil, again, this is Tansen. I commented on your paper in Delhi, but I didn't ask you then, and I'll ask you now. What was your methodology in writing this paper? Did you reach the conclusion before you read the sources, or did you reach the conclusion after you had analyzed the sources?
Hello, Mr. Kumar. This is Keen from Hong Kong. Also following up with Tansen's comments. Because I'm not a scholar in international relations, but I guess there are quite a lot of theory, like in explaining China-India relation in your paper, for example. So I just wonder, because in your paper I don't see any theoretical framework in explaining the arguments that you are trying to make. So just a comment, maybe you can add some theoretical things in your paper. Thank you.
Anil, I'll be very quick. You see, even if you wish to focus on the state, that is the institutions of statecraft, right? If you say through China's eyes, even then it will be very useful to pluralize the entire analysis and look at the visions of different institutions within China. You will find that probably different ministries will have very different perspectives on a whole range of issues.
Jenny, you want?
Hi, Jianying from Beijing and New York. I was quite struck by your paper of Sound and Fury. Actually, I liked it very much. I thought this is very candid and frank, view of from the Indian side about the rising China. In fact, personally, I share a lot of your critical comments about some of the Chinese policies. But my question would be, in fact, it seemed to be, it might be interesting for you to bring into the picture exactly the Indian side of, your paper is about the Chinese perception of rising India. But what about the mirror side, you know, the Indian view of the rising China? Because in my knowledge, some of the readings, this sounds very similar. If you read a certain amount of, website or Indian media perception of the rising China, they seem to be quite angry, suspicious, hawkish, and full of a wounded kind of nationalistic emotions, which I do find in the Chinese side. But maybe it would be interesting if you put that into the context of this is, even if you do, I thought this is a very kind of black and white portrayal of the bilateral perceptions, but you would end up as, maybe black and black on both sides, at least. That would be one way of enriching it somewhat. And the other thing is to, as some of the others said, would be interesting to broaden it to other, blocks of opinions, aside from this kind of military centric or state policy centric kind of materials. Thank you.
Anil, as a lifelong journalist, may I just say one thing? Beware of perceptions. Perceptions don't always reflect reality. And the person who said this most strongly was Wen Jiabao at Hua Hin to our Prime Minister in 2009. The largest part of their common declaration there was saying, for God's sake, the media of your both countries, don't, for heaven's sake, churn up this whole issue of the Dalai Lama going to Tawang and turn it into something that will force us effectively into war with each other. So for heaven's sake, I think that you don't necessarily have to go all the way to saying, well, you must read everything in Chinese to understand what the Chinese are saying about you. Because the Chinese make it a point that when there's an important thing, they pick it up and they put it into English. Same thing happens from the Indian side, So I think that just basically there are lots of positive things going on simultaneously at the policy level, even while the media is doing this. So therefore, please, I don't think this is a question of black versus white or black versus black. I think that we are doing a bit of both.
Thank you. Anil, I'm sorry we won't be able to give you any time to respond. I hope you have taken note of all the comments. We are really way out of time. Please do stay online if you can, even though it's very late by India time. It's past 9:30 p.m.